So I'm sure by now that almost everybody has heard of the horrible mass shootings at Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut. And tragically, this isn't the first time that we as Americans have had to deal with this sort of thing as a nation. And like is normal after an event like this, the internet is absolutely buzzing with all sorts of different opinions and questions. But the number one question that I see people asking all across the internet is just, what the hell happened to our society? You know, is the world going to hell in a handbasket? How could this have possibly happened? How far have we slipped as a society that we create a monster that's capable of doing these horrific things and gunning down children in a school? And I must admit, on the surface, it really does seem like they're onto something. I mean, obviously something's wrong in our society, but in order to make this comparison, you have to first establish what is the other side of your frame of reference. If you want to say that we today in 2012 are in a horrible, sorry state, we first need to establish what are you comparing it to. If you're going to make this comparison that American society is going down the toilet and that we're in a sorry state as it is, what do you believe to be the safest, most ideal period in American history? And a quick Google search will actually lead you to a landslide of studies, because this is actually a really common question for sociologists and survey groups, and it's been found multiple times that most Americans feel that either the 1950s or the 1960s were the safest, most ideal, most prosperous time in American history. Now, the first thing we need to do is make an important distinction between the United States in 2012 and the United States in 1950. In 2012, 313 million people lived in the USA, and there were 9 culturally significant mass murders. We know that each one of these mass murders was committed by a single person, so if we do some basic arithmetic and we divide 313 million by 9, we can find out that there is one mass murderer per 34,777,778 people. Now we can take this figure and compare it to the population versus mass murders in 1950. In 1959, there was 152 million people living in the United States. So, if we take that statistic that we found earlier that says there's approximately one mass murderer per 35 million people in the United States as of 2012, we can find out how many mass murderers there should have been in 1959 if it was the exact same amount of people becoming mass murderers. If we take the population of 152 million people as of 1959 and divide it by 35 million people, we find that approximately 4 people should have become mass murderers in 1959 should there be the same statistical probability of a mass incident happening. However, should the theory hold true that our society is going down the crapper, we should find that there are less than 4 mass murders in 1959, ideally none at all, to prove that society is actually going wrong and that this is a new thing that is unique to the United States. In a tragic yet interesting twist, it turns out that my statistics are actually accurate, and in 1959 there were exactly 4 culturally significant mass murders in the United States. First off, in early 1959, 2 men by the name of Perry Smith and Dick Hickok killed 4 members of the Clutter family in Holcomb, Kansas. Shortly thereafter, the 2 men traveled to rural Osprey, Kansas, where they killed 4 members of the Walker family, including 2 children. The media created a frenzy over the Walker family murders, and at first police had trouble locating the 2 men, and at one point 587 people were suspects. Shortly thereafter, a 20-year-old man by the name of Charles Starkweather took his 14-year-old girlfriend, Carol Fugit, on a road trip all through Nebraska and Wyoming, indiscriminately killing as many as 11 people. They particularly liked to stop in wealthy neighborhoods and kill wealthy individuals, and the incident caused a huge stir in the media. The couple were eventually caught when authorities caught up to them by pure chance. The couple left 11 bodies in their wake, including several children, the youngest of who was Betty Jean Bartlett, who was only 2 years old, and they killed by strangling and stabbing her. Frequent sightings of the 2 were reported, and charges of incompetence were even filed against the Lincoln Police Department for their inability to capture the 2 quickly. Next, on January 6, 1960, National Airlines Flight 2511 exploded over Bolivia, North Carolina, en route from New York International Airport in New York City. All 34 people aboard the plane were killed, including 29 passengers and 5 crew members. During recovery from the crash, it was discovered that the remains of one passenger, Julian A. Frank, a lawyer from New York City, were missing from the accident site. His body was eventually found over 16 miles away at a place called Snow's Marsh, west of the Cape Fear River. Frank's autopsy showed that he had been fatally injured by a dynamite explosion originating either in his lap or, more likely, immediately under his seat. Officially, the investigation remains open, but Julian A. Frank is commonly accepted to have been the bomber on this flight, and regardless, National Airlines Flight 2511 was one of the first great transportation-related mass murders. And finally, on September 15, 1959, Paul Harold Orgeron, a tile setter and ex-convict, forced his way into the Poe Elementary School building and set off a bomb that killed 6 people and injured 18 others. These included children and the perpetrator himself. The incident started when Orgeron attempted to enroll his son in the 2nd grade at the school, but he was denied access because he lacked the proper birth and health certificates for his son. He left the school claiming he would return the next day with the documents. Orgeron began threatening the school, sending them notes threatening to bomb the campus. The explosion claimed 6 lives, including both Orgeron and his son, 2 students, the custodian, and the teacher. Of the 18 injured, the principal suffered a broken leg, and 2 7-year-olds each were amputated at the leg. These events all happened in either 1959 or 1960 as well. Incidents at schools involving children are not uncommon in American history. In 1966, Charles Whitman killed 16 children and wounded 32 others at a school, and in 1927, Andrew Kehoe killed 38 elementary school children and wounded 58 more. In the end, what can we take away from this? Basically, we can learn that society is not actually getting any worse, and we're definitely not regressing into a more violent culture. The reason that we have more violent outbreaks in our society is just because we have more people. And it may seem like we're living in much more turbulent times, but we're actually not. Statistically, there's no more bad guys now than there have ever been. Another huge contributing factor is that information just spreads a lot faster than it did in 1959. Back then, there was no internet, network television was in its infancy, and long-distance phone calling was expensive and time-consuming. So odds are, unless you lived pretty close to one of these incidents happening, you probably didn't hear about it for weeks or months, or maybe even not at all. Today, however, with the advent of the internet, when something like this happens, we find out about it instantly, and we're exposed to all of it, no matter where we live, who we are, or what's going on around it. In fact, if you really want to dive into it, we could actually make a pretty strong argument that society is doing better now in 2012 than we were doing in the 1950s. Back then, roughly 45%, or almost half, of first-degree murders went unsolved, meaning that the perpetrator was never caught and he just walked free for the rest of his life. But now, in 2012, with the advent of better technology and more strict CSI practices, our first-degree unsolved murder rate is down to about 20%, which is a huge improvement. So realistically, not only are we not any more violent than we were in the past, but we're also getting a lot better at catching the people who are violent. So I guess the point that I'm trying to make is, let's stop trying to turn this shooting into just another soapbox to forward a political or religious or social agenda, because it's really about none of these. So let's refocus our energies and just try to take care of these families that are grieving and see if there's anything we can do in the future to make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen again. That's my rant for tonight. Everybody have a good night. Stay safe.